On this video, we will see first assertions, which are these functions that allow you to see if a test fails or not. And on the second part, we will see some annotations, which are labels that you put over functions or over the class in order to give these functions or classes some characteristics. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so here we have one of the examples that we have in our library. Let me explain what we're doing here. So first, we have what we saw on the previous video, run all tests, that does the AnyLogic unit launcher with the doTest method. You have the tester that doesn't have anything, and you have 3 tests here. And here in run all tests, we are running all the tests in these test classes. Then you have a model, but it's not really a model. It doesn't do anything, but it has some functions that we will use to explore the different things you can do in JUnit. So the calculator has the add function, a plus b, sus, I minus b, multiply, a multiplied by b, and divide, which is a bit different because you don't want to divide by 0. So if b equals 0, we'll throw an exception, division by 0. Otherwise, you can return a divided by b. Then you have the student with an ID, a name, and a department. And these getters and setters, they don't matter so much, but you can get the name and set the name with this. Finally, you have the student service here that has a list of students. You can get the students list with this function, and you can add a student to the list, and you can get the student by ID with find first. You get which student has the same ID as the input. Then get student names by department, but you're really getting the IDs, not the names here. So you find all the students in a particular department. You loop to get all the IDs, and you return the array with all the IDs of these students. And finally, you have the get student by name. This is a bit different because you do the find first using streams, but what you can do here is that you can throw an exception if there's no student found. So let's start with student service test. What we want to learn here is about the assertions. We talked on the previous video about the test annotation, and we saw the assert equals. Here we'll see other asserts, and there are a bunch of asserts that you can use. This assert is basically the test that will fail. There's a bunch of asserts. We will see a few of them. So assert false is something that will fail if the result is true. So what it does is we create a student service instance. We get all the students that exist. We check if the list is empty. And assert true results means that you expect this result to be true. So you expect the list to be empty, which will obviously be because we haven't added any student to the list. So this will not fail. Then we create a new student and we add that student to the list. And now we get the list of all the students and we check if the list is empty. Assert false means that you expect this result to be false. If it's true, it will fail. So here we have assert true and assert false. You can put multiple asserts in one test, but they have to be related to the same thing. Otherwise, it's better to just do a function. In this case, it's the same thing. We're checking if the list basically works. So assert true for this one and assert false for this one. Okay, another one is assert null. So what you do here is we create again the student service. We add a student to the student service, and we try to get the student by ID. We're using the ID 2. This student doesn't exist, so this will return null. Assert null means that whatever the result is here, we expect it to be null. If it's not null, then the test will fail. So let's run this, and you will see that all the tests passed. So for example, here, if we put 1, which means that you will try to find a student that exists, this student 2 will not be null, so this will fail. And you will see that the test that failed is get student by the null test, which is the name of this test. And it tells you that the expected was null, but the result was not null. Okay, so that's it with the assert null. Another one is assert array equals, which compares two different arrays. Here we add a new instance of the student service, we add 3 students, and then we get all the student IDs by department. So the department 2 has 2 students with ID 2 and 3. That's why what we expect the array X to be equal to 2 and 3. That's why we use assert array equals, which compares expected IDs with array X, which should be the same. If they are not the same, the test will fail. And finally, you have the assert throws that I don't use too much. Assert throws checks if whatever you're doing throws an exception. So here we created the instance, we add 3 students, and then we check if this function will throw an error. Remember that getStudentByName here returns an error, this runtime exception, if the find first returns nothing. So that's why with assert throws, we say what kind of exception we expect, and then we run the function that will throw that exception or not. Since there's no person with this name, that means that the test will be passed. This won't be passed if jocks is added here, because jocks already exist, whatever the name is. So the test that failed, student not found test, expected this exception, but nothing was thrown, so there was no exception. Okay, now we will move to the calculator test. And here we will focus on annotations. So the calculator test has 3 tests. The add test for the add function, subtest for the subtraction function, and div by 0 test for the division function. The asserts don't matter really. We are using assert equals and assert throws, but what we care about is the annotations. When you have the same thing happening for all your tests, you want to create a setup that will do something before each test. So in this case, before each will allow you to run this setup function before everything that has the test annotation. So this is equivalent to putting this here, basically, and putting this here, and so on. But we're doing the setup. The same thing with after each. After each test, if you want to clean, you set up the calculator equal to null. And that means that after each test, this will happen. So this is equivalent to putting this here at the end of each test. But this is cleaner. So you can use after each, before each, but there's also others like before all or after all. Before all will run something before all the tests. So you can do that. Now, let's check this one, display name. So here I display name and put add 2 numbers, but you don't see anything related to that here because nothing failed. But let's make this test fail and see what happens. Instead of putting the add test, which is what we have seen so far that happens here, it will display the name that you chose here. So in this case, we will make this one fail as well. We'll use assert does not throw because that means that we expect not to have an exception. So if we run this, now we have 2 tests that failed. Add 2 numbers, which has a display name, and div by 0 test, which doesn't have a display name. It's only the name of the functions that you get. And finally, we want to check this execution one. The execution one allows you to run tests in parallel. So in this case, the default for our library, remember you're using the AnyLogic JUnit launcher from the library we created, that has a default to run all those tests in series, so one after the other. But you can change that. To do that, you can use concurrent here. This annotation requires these 2 imports. When you use concurrent, that means that you are running all the tests that you want in parallel. But the default in our library is 1, so you need to add something. If you want to run all the tests in parallel, you have to say how many tests do you want to run in parallel. So here you can add another argument, which means that you will run 4 tests in parallel. So if we do some trace lengths here, let's start by using same, and you will see that if we run this, it will run the setup, then the sus test, then the setup, then the add test, and so on. So this is because they run one after the other. But if we use concurrent, you will see that it runs all the setups, and after you see this trace length, it's because your computer is running 3 tests at the same time in parallel. They're not running one after the other. So this is very useful. Sometimes it allows you to use multiple cores in your computer. If you have a good computer, this is a good thing to use. So let's remove all the trace lengths. And the last thing I want to tell you is that sometimes you don't need to do the assert equals. There's another option to make a test fail, which is the fail function. So for example, instead of assert equals, you can say if actual result is not equal to 30, then you fail. And this is valid as well. So let's change this to have our test fail to see what happens. So the test that failed is add 2 numbers from the display name, and the message is add test is failing, which is the message we wrote here. And that's it.